What's going on with your folks? 86 Boxing. Joshua, you can call me. See it right there on the screen. Happy to be here once again. I'm going to be talking boxing. I appreciate everyone involved. Those that will be watching here live, as well as those that drop by in the aftermath. Holding it down here, DC per usual. Got Barrow here by my side. We came to talk boxing history. I was thinking about who I would talk about because it was a very busy week. So it ended up being someone who has been pretty much talked about for a long time. But hey, it doesn't matter at the end of the day because of the fact that, hey, we're talking boxing history. Who else is talking boxing history right now? Someone point him out. That's what I thought, right? So we're going to be talking about the Galveston giant, Jack Johnson. Let's get it. Shout out to Rodolfo Rivera Jr. in the mix here. Appreciate you, Rodolfo. Says salute and says, what's up to Barrow? Barrow sends her regards. Barrow showing some love. You know, I'm standing up. That's how I'm operating now, so I can't show her. I guess I had to lean the screen down, but she's having a good time here. We're here to talk about Jack Johnson. You know him as the Galveston Giant. They called him Lil Arthur. Many names, both on the positive side and the negative side. But that being said, one of the greatest heavyweights in boxing history. For some, he is the greatest. He's one of the greatest fighters in boxing history. For some, he is the greatest. But that being said, there are varying opinions about him. One thing that can't be said is that he was not a trendsetter, or I guess you could say an enigma, a polarizing figure in the sport. If you think about boxing, and I've talked about Jack Johnson before, if you think about boxing and you think about the polarization of figures in the sport or just in sports in general, there's probably none more polarizing than Jack Johnson. There are a few I can think of that would kind of be in a similar status, I guess you could say, some for different reasons. That being said, just across the stratosphere of sports in general, thinking about the history, probably the most polarizing figure in sports was Jack Johnson. And it's for a multitude of reasons, and some of them we'll cover here as we're going through this discussion. Some of the others I think that you'll know of or you'll find out in looking up different things that are out there online, even on this channel. As mentioned, I've had discussions on Jack Johnson before. I have a few videos, I guess you can say, out there. Nothing outside of discussions similar to this one that goes as deep in a documentary style, which maybe I should do it. But then Ken Burns has Unforgivable Blackness, which is out there. And I know some have said that, hey, they didn't feel that it covered everything or they didn't think it was good. But, hey, I thought it was good. But that being said, you know, I have a few things out there, but we're going to talk about just the man himself and probably dive more into the fights because I think that's what matters for some who are interested in the sport, in the history, and how things went down back in the day. And, man, when it comes to the fights, he was very much involved and a part of some pretty historic matchups as well as historic all-time great competition. That's one thing that we can't let go by the wayside there because to think about how Jack Johnson became to be the man, the first Black world heavyweight champion, it was most certainly through a path that was chartered in facing some top-notch competition that generally just happened back in the day. And oftentimes, a lot of the great Black fighters, they had to fight each other multiple times at that. And that's the way you made your way or you got by there in the sport. So it was not uncommon to see such feats. Shout out to Slayton. Big shout out there to my guy Boz in the mix there. So happy birthday there to Boz. It's his birthday today, people. Show him some love there. Be sure to go subscribe to him, clicking on there, Slayton G. But that's my man Boz there. Check us out on Boxing Shit. We're gonna be back in the mix here. Trust me. But it's his birthday today, so happy birthday. Hope you enjoyed that, buddy. Hey, we're gonna keep doing the thing there for sure. And shout out to my man, the Final Boss. Says salute 86. Hey, appreciate you there, Final Boss. It's always great to have you in the mix. And you always share some great insight. So I appreciate you doing such. So thank you. And hey, Rodolfo sends his happy birthday to Boz there. But we're here to talk Jack Johnson, the Galveston Giant, Lil Arthur, the first black world heavyweight champion, but so much more. So much more. One of the great defensive fighters in the sport. You could say one of the most premier or the premier defensive fighter in the sport. I mean, think about Jack Johnson on top of his game, what he was able to do defensively, and man, something super special. Very much different in terms of the rule sets and what was allowed. And you could argue some of the things that he got away with or transpired back then wouldn't be allowed today, though we still see some of that today. How many times do we often complain of an opponent holding and the referee not taking any points and letting it go on for too much or too long? So that gives you a sort of glimpse into things, but his style was more catered towards that, where he would get a guy on the inside, tie him up for the most part, and kind of nullify their offense in some sense. That was the Jack Johnson style of defense that was there. Of course, he had other wrinkles to his game. He could be offensive, all of that stuff. But for the most part, that generally is what gets you to the sort of defensive nature and that prowess that was Jack Johnson's defense. So we're going to talk about that here today. While you're here, or if you're here, do me a favor, hit that like button. If you don't subscribe, feel free to subscribe. Hey, it won't hurt anything. I'm going to keep trying to bring you boxing history. Let's be honest. When we hear these, we say, hey, we want you to subscribe because we want to continue to bring you these episodes, these discussions, etc. I'm going to continue bringing them regardless. So, hey, cat's out of the bag. But that being said, please do subscribe if you have the time there to click a button, and turn on the notifications if you're really into boxing history. But I know that some people think they are, and they may not really be into boxing history, at least not to the degree that I am, because when we are talking about guys who were making their name in the game back in the early 1900s, or guys who were, shining their boots in the 1800s, the late 1800s, mid and late 1800s. Not everybody's into that. Hey, to each his, her own, I guess you can say. But that being said, hey, there's nothing like knowing, learning, and staying attuned to history in itself. Shout out there to Acacia Hicks. Cheers there to you. Said, can I show you what a hater is? Hey, feel free there, Acacia. Appreciate you dropping by. The Fighter Boss says, not the best to watch on film, but Johnson was an amazing defensive fighter who knew how to control a fight. That he very much did know how to do, because generally, as Final Boss puts it there, and thank you for sharing it, whenever he wanted to take his defensive prowess on an opponent and really control a fight, he knew exactly how to do that. And that's one of the things that helped him stand out. And that's one of the things that made him a very, very frustrating individual to fight. That made him a very frustrating individual to fight, because he dealt with those types of, or because you had to deal with those types of situations where he would basically tie you up. He'd have your arms gripped, controlling those. You couldn't get off the offense that you wanted. He's about 6. He stood about 6 feet. So he was around 200 pounds, There were times when he was under or such, but generally, just think about him being around 200 pounds or close to that. And there were points in which he was well over that, especially later in his career. Just thinking about that, him holding on to you, controlling your arms, you can't do anything. Not to mention he could slip in an uppercut or two right there, and you have a hard time doing anything. It'll frustrate you. That's why you had examples of guys like Fireman Jim Flynn, who resorted to simply kind of headbutting Jack Johnson, and that ultimately got him disqualified. And man, just think about that, dealing with an individual of that nature. The final boss says, I wish we had some earlier Johnson on film. I believe the Burns fights is the first he was filmed. You know, when I think about that, just thinking of it here off top, that could have very well been it. I'm trying to think. That might have been the case there. That Burns fight. We had a number of them there. That might be the case there, the final boss. I definitely have to look into it. Now that you mention it, though, and I'm thinking about what is out there, what I've seen, I think you are right there, buddy. And I guess that is saying something. So we missed a lot of the earlier stuff. Now, I do know of, just because I've dove into his background and history, I do know of his background and some of those earlier fights and accounts. So therefore, I think about his time in the ring with the likes of Denver and Martin and what he was able to do there. I think about some of the other fights, his wars with Joe Jeanette, his fight with Sam Langford, etc. I think about all of those things, and you're right. None of that was on film, so we have to go off of the accounts that were out there. Acacia says, bro, you trash. You will never make it. Good to go there, Acacia. Hey, what is making it? It depends on where that is. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? We'll see where that is. See, that's what a hater is, but I'm a subscriber. I appreciate you there, Acacia. Says, yes, good information. Hey, appreciate you there. Hey, no doubt about it. Hey, it's one of those things. You want to learn about the great Jack Johnson, you're in the right spot right there. The final boss mentions, I believe Johnson was the best heavyweight in the clinch in history. I can't recall any opponents being so dominant in stopping his opponent's offense on the inside so well. So, yeah, I think you're right there. So he was definitely, just thinking about it from a defensive perspective there on the inside, he might very well be the greatest, just thinking about it in the clinch. I do think about, of course, a common opponent or opponent that he fought, which was Jim Jeffries. He was a guy that was great on the inside. But when you take into account the clinch, defensively, that certainly would side with Jack Johnson. There have been great boxers who've had great offense there on the inside or when involved in the clinch. But defensively, you're right there, the final boss. He had a way of just nullifying a fighter's game. And even in the case of that fight with Jim Jeffries, while it was not the Jeffries of old, he did pretty much nullify any Jeffries offense that he tried to put out, essentially. And I think that ultimately did not work in Jeffries' favor when he got tied up there on the inside. Just thinking about the time he had been off, just having that sort of itch of being in the ring, having that sort of course, he had the mental stuff, some of the sort of natural reflexes and things of that nature, some of the national memory, secondary or ancillary second nature type of things that would come about if you're a fighter for a long period of time that you never forget. So, of course, you're going to know those things, but operating and doing them in the manner that one would be able to do at the top of their game after you've been out of the ring for nearly 6 years, that's an entirely different story. And so Johnson was able to nullify his game to a high degree right there. So I think that is something to help. I think that is something to take into account. And one of the reasons that Jeffries was not able to be successful, that defensive aspect of it, because in the clinch game, no doubt about it, Jack Johnson when you think about it, he is the best heavyweight. Thinking about that, certainly, and as I mentioned, we have to take into account the rules aspects and how some things have shifted at that particular or at this particular point. But it's one of those things. So Asia says, "Bro, I need help. I got into a fight. So can you tell me information so I don't?" Okay, got to go. All right, appreciate you there. Hey, no doubt about it. But all I gotta say is, you got into a fight. Hey, keep your head in the right place, right there. And don't stay on the line too much. Don't keep your head on the line too much right there if you got into a fight. And always remember that the jab is the tone setter right there. The jab is the tone setter. But we're here to talk about the great Jack Johnson, folks. Jack Johnson. Matter of fact, I want to bring up a little sheet that gives you an idea. I guess you could say a stat sheet or his notable fights to give you an idea of the type of opponents that he fought. Because as I was speaking, he did not just all of a sudden get a shot at Jim. Well, not Jim Jefferson, but at Tommy Burns, who he ultimately won the title from. That didn't just come out of nowhere. It took a lot of work to get to that point. And to get to that point, he had to take on a lot of top-level competition. Let me give you a glimpse into that competition. Now, this isn't every single person that he fought, of course, but these are some of the more notable opponents that are on his resume. And many of them you will know of. James J. Jeffries, Sam McVeigh, Joe Jeanette, Denver Ed Martin, Joe Butler, Young Peter Jackson, Jess Willard, Frank Moran, Joe Kowinski, Battling Jim Johnson, Hank Griffin, Frank Childs, George Gardner, Bob Fitzsimmons, Stanley Ketchel, Fireman Jim Flynn. Man, just look at those names right there. Hold on, I need to bring that up again. I'm going to give you a second. Just take a look at those names, because me saying them is one thing, but really look at those names and think about it. These are the opponents on Jack Johnson's resume. And mind you, I don't even have Tommy Burns listed there. I don't know why I don't have Tommy Burns listed there, who he won the title from. But that being said, look at these names that are on his resume. I mean, you really don't get any better than that from a heavyweight standpoint. It's pretty miraculous, pretty amazing. Just thinking about that. Got you there, Acacia. TFB says Johnson's clinch uppercuts were brutal too. Yeah, no doubt about it. Another guy who was like that, and we don't have a lot of footage of him, is Harry Wills, who was actually bigger than Johnson, and man, had one of the toughest, or had one of the greatest primes, I would say, as a heavyweight in boxing history. If you don't know, now, of course, we'll have a video on the channel. Harry Wills, the Black Panther, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, between 1918 and 1922. I stand by the fact that I feel that he was the best heavyweight in the world at that particular time. No shade to my man, Jack Dempsey, who I am a big fan of as well. But Harry Wills, if you don't know him, check him out. But he was pretty brutal on the inside as well with those uppercuts. A big, strong guy, as mentioned. So you can learn about him. Maybe I'll do something on him again, just so people get that awareness of how good Harry Wills was. And he could have been an even bigger star, mega star, had certain things fell in his favor, but they ultimately did not. But you are right. So Johnson's uppercuts, yeah, they were on that level for sure, in terms of he was brutal with them, and he was a guy who knew how to throw them at the right times as well, and he could control the opponent. So I think about when he was in there with Stanley Ketchel, of course, Jack Dempsey or Jack Johnson pretty much controlled every facet of that particular contest. And the reason being is because, of course, he was a bigger guy. And also, you just think about what made his game what it was. There was no way Stanley Ketchel was going to be able to get in and do some of the things that he could probably work on middleweights, light heavyweights, or guys around that range, on the likes of Jack Johnson. I think that's ultimately one of the things he found out. And we know what happened in that contest, though there's a lot of good, interesting, and sort of controversial information out there in that regard. So shout out to my man at Fight Films guy, Carl Weingarten. So appreciate you there, Carl. But he has a good video over on his channel at Fight Films guy. And he is responsible for a lot of the footage that is out there from some of those old fights back in the day, because he's a collector. And as a collector, he's done the honor of providing a lot of this free and open to the public for us to be able to watch some of these guys in the mix there. So shout out to Carl. But yeah, Johnson, insane there on the inside. What a resume. Yes, indeed, there, TFB. Excuse me. Yes, what indeed? Yes, indeed. What a resume. His resume was most certainly top tier, just when you think about any of the heavyweights in history. And I think that really puts things into perspective. And as noted, I did not include every single person on there. As a matter of fact, I might need to redo this. I actually created this one. I already had this in the mix because I think I may have brought up Jack Johnson when talking about another fighter. So for this stream here in particular, I didn't create a new one or anything. I already had it loaded here. And just look at that. I mean, you won't find too many resumes greater than that. Name or two I want to point out: Sam McVay, Joe Jeanette. Those are two of the greatest that a lot of people don't know of right there. Excuse me. Those are two of the greatest that many probably have heard their name in passing, but it goes deeper than that. I haven't done an individual video on Joe Jeanette outside of maybe a photo related type of animation video. But that being said, Joe Jeanette, one of the greatest in the history of the sport. And actually, he and Jack Johnson fought an insane amount of times. I don't even recall the amount of times, but I believe it might have gotten to double digits, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, yeah, my guy, Random McKeesick Thoughts. I know he would know. I meant to have him on here, as a matter of fact, or I meant to get with him. But that being said, it is what it is. But Random would know for sure. And if I get him on, he could talk about it. But he and Joe Jeanette fought countless amount of times. Joe Jeanette is about my height, 5'11", if you don't know. And a guy with a long, stiff jab and one of the best just all-around boxers at that particular time, certainly in the heavyweight division. And he was an Iron Man, essentially. He could take countless amount of punishment, even punishment from the other guy I mentioned, Sam McVay, who is pretty much that era's Mike Tyson. And I have a video of Sam McVay that dives into his career for sure. You can see that on the channel. You look up Sam or search up Sam McVay. You can see spellings MCVEA or MCVEY. So there are different iterations of it. But if you search that up, he'll pop up regardless, or search either one of those. But Sam McVay was basically, I mean, if you look at his build, from the build to the height, everything, pretty much that version of, or that era's Mike Tyson, a guy who was just brutal with his punches. I mean, built like a tank. He looked different as far as you compare him to his peers who were fighting in that particular period. And this is even throwing in the greats like Sam Langford and such. You know what I'm saying? You can throw in the Dempseys, you can throw in whomever. But if you look at Sam McVay, the way he was built, I mean, it looked different, like Tyson, just seeing his size and explosiveness and what he was able to do, and just knowing the frame that he had. I mean, it's insane. And so Sam McVay was that. He was the guy who fought, of course, Jack Johnson. They fought early on. And I would say in Jack Johnson's career there, prior to, of course, the title reign, all of these guys, as a matter of fact, both of these guys, I should say, prior to the title reign in itself, they fought. And the thing about it is McVeigh, he was one of those individuals. He had the power pretty much to get you out in any round. He is one where we do have a little bit of footage out there of him. Not much fight footage. He did some stuff where he was in some movies as well. And there is a little bit of, I could think, training footage or something of that nature. But we do have a video of him battling Jim Johnson that is out there. And there have been those who have done some enhancements to said video as well. But battling Jim Johnson, that's another common opponent there for Jack Johnson. And that's the black fighter that got a shot at the world heavyweight title during Jack Johnson's reign, battling Jim Johnson. He stood about 5'9", but it wasn't a small 5'9". He was a pretty solid, thick frame as well there for a 5'9" heavyweight. When you think about that, you don't have a ton of, or when you think about 5'9" heavyweights, you probably don't see a ton of them today. Maybe there are not a ton of them, I would say. But that being said, battling Jim, he's the type that some would throw in the journeyman category. I guess you can say he was somewhere around that range, or maybe a slight step above, I guess you can say, in terms of he had a lot of losses, probably as many losses or close to as many losses as he did wins. But in this case, of course, you do have to look at the resume in itself and look at the competition that he was in with, and you'll understand why some of those losses came about, because he had to deal with some of the greatest that the sport has seen, bar none, in history. So that is a factor that you can throw in there for sure. So battling Jim Johnson, he got a shot at Jack Johnson for a world title. I believe it happened in France. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe it was in the U.S. I believe it happened in, I want to say France or somewhere overseas. And he battling Jim Johnson, he's one of those guys, a lot of people don't know of him or wouldn't really regard or rate him from an overall perspective when thinking about the great heavyweights in history. But he played a role in the sport for sure, especially during this period, because he took on a lot of the top shelf competition that was out there at heavyweight. A number of them whom would go on to be either world champion or the closest things to world champion without being it. Cheers there, Johnny. Cheers there, Johnny. 5213. Appreciate you there, buddy. Dropping by, showing some love, and showing my guy right there. If I'm not mistaken, that's my guy right there, Reggie Bush, who made me a fan of the New Orleans Saints. And that's why I'm a New Orleans Saints fan, for those that didn't know right there. If you ask me, the greatest college player of all time right there, Reggie Bush, the Heisman winner right there. As we know, we got that hardware right there as well. So appreciate you dropping by. Cheers there, Devil Face. My man Alistair Overeem says Tookie Williams was 5'9". Oh, interesting. Oh, Tookie. He's out now too, right? He had his sentence commuted. So shout out Tookie. Holding it down. All right, that's what's up right there. Good stuff there. Appreciate you there, Alistair. Good to have you here in the mix for sure. Hey, Johnny confirms it, the one and only. Hey, we're on the same page there. My guy right there. So salute to you. I appreciate you showing love for sure. Hey, that's the GOAT college player, if you ask me, and maybe even Johnny right there. Reggie Bush. If you didn't know, go look at some of the highlights. Completely unstoppable. USC hasn't been the same since they lost him. Unstoppable for sure. But yeah, salute to everyone in here in the mix. Appreciate you showing love, coming by, doing the thing. We're talking about Jack Johnson, folks. Let me pull it up in case you don't know. We're talking about the great Jack Johnson, who is, by some standards, by some arguments, the greatest heavyweight of all time. For some, that being said, most certainly one of the GOATs when you think about the heavyweight division in the sport of boxing right there. A true pioneer in the sport. And I'm not talking about as though he was the earliest of any and everything, but just in the sense of some of the barriers he broke in terms of being the first Black world heavyweight champion of all time there. So I'm going to show you there Look at the names there on his resume there. Something special right there. And as mentioned, I don't have all of the names on there. And it's kind of crazy as well that I don't have all of the names there because yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I was forgetting there at times. Excuse me, I think I was forgetting that particular time, or it's only so many names I guess that you can end up putting on there. But I realized, of course, earlier I don't have Tommy Burns on there. Another one I don't have on there is Sam Langford, the Boston Bone Crusher, Sam Langford of Canada, who many regard as the greatest of all time. If you ask me, it took me a minute because everybody knows my love for the man himself, the GOAT, Muhammad Ali Boumaier. Man, he rated as my GOAT, and I guess you can say sentimentally he's still my GOAT. But that being said, Sam Langford, man, very, very special fighter who doesn't get talked about a ton, who ended up fighting Jack Johnson at a time when Sam Langford was not even a heavyweight. Now, Sam Langford is commonly known or more known as a heavyweight these days. And I'm going to send a link to Random Acoustic Thoughts because I think he can even put it in perspective. If you don't know Random Acoustic Thought, man, he knows so much about the heavyweight history and rivalries between these individuals that Jack Johnson faced. You're talking about the Jeanettes, you're talking about the Langfords, the Sam McVeighs, all in the mix there. But these are some of the greatest. Harry Wills, we'll talk about it. Some of the greatest that the sport has seen, who don't often get the same amount of publicity and credit that they probably deserve. And I think some of that is tied to the fact that many people don't know of them or haven't seen much, or they haven't seen any of them, because a lot of them only have a limited amount of footage that is out there. Jack Johnson, to his credit, to his credit, in our benefit, there is a decent amount of footage of him that is out there. But as TFB noted, the final boss is really just that heavyweight championship footage. So post World Heavyweight Championship, but he did so much more, even far beyond that point in which he actually won the title, and that's when he was battling golf with the likes of Langford, with the likes of Jeanette, Sam McVeigh. Fun fact, of course, after he fought Jess Willard, who I did a video on where we were discussing his career about 2 weeks ago at this particular point, when he fought Jess Willard there in Havana, Cuba, this was 1915, the intent was, or at least he felt that he was going to win. Ultimately, that did not happen. But the intent was for him to face Sam McVeigh in the aftermath of that contest there in Cuba. So that was who was intended to be his next opponent. Now, of course, this was stated, quoted, written. There are newspaper sources for it. Whether it would have officially happened, I don't know, because Johnson did say he would fight some others prior to that, of course, and it didn't happen. But that being said, the intent was for him to fight Sam McVeigh. Just imagine that. That would have been amazing for us to have footage of Jack Johnson versus Sam McVeigh, the Mike Tyson of his time there, and we would have that. I'm sure it would have lasted the test of time. You know what I'm saying? It would have survived, because we've lost a lot of boxing footage. That's been one of the issues of why we don't have a ton of these individuals out there. But that being said, it's one of those things. So Johnny 5213 asked, how tall was Sam Langford? So Sam Langford, who was listed as about 5'7", 5'7" and a half, which is very which is very interesting, right? So, because it's not like the tallest or whatnot, but he ultimately ended up having the build that he did have some measurables. Like his reach was certainly longer than that of the typical person who would be in that 5'7" range, and Of course, he had mass to him. He didn't have like he was a smaller guy, but certainly not a smaller overall build as he continued to add on and produce weight. I mean, he added on the weight. And proportionally speaking, you could just see from an upper body perspective that it pretty much spread about, and it ended up allowing him to be able to be one of these guys who you could say generally started his career around 135 pounds. The lightweight division, let's just say for there, though there are some different sort of iteration sources or variations as to where he started his career. But that being said, let's just assume lightweight, 135 pounds, he would go on to become a heavyweight, and not just a heavyweight, but a heavyweight who could knock out other heavyweights that were bigger, larger, stronger than he was, or deemed to be at least. And of course, a number of them did have the sort of mass and overall size that from, I guess if you looked at it from just a measurable standpoint, they were supposed to be bigger and stronger. But hey, he was able to do what he needed to do. Cheers there, Johnny. Hey, no problem there. No problem there, buddy. Hey, that's what I'm here to share the information. Share the information so we can relive and recount some of the feats of some of these great athletes that were out there and doing their thing back in the day who were often a bit overlooked. But yeah, so Sam Langford at 5'7", 5'7.5", whatever it may be around there. Just think about the fact that he was able to knock out guys who were bigger than he was. When I told you Harry Wills, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, he was 6'2", 200 plus pounds. Sam Langford had no problem knocking him out in the midst of Sam Langford, or with Sam Langford being in the midst of his prime there. And Harry Wills ultimately ended up getting the better of Langford as Wills entered his prime, which of course meant Langford was on the tail end of his or back end or pretty much out of his prime. And that's one of the reasons there. But just think about that, knocking out guys 6'2", 200 pounds. But there are others you think about that he was in the ring with. He knocked out, and even beyond heavyweight, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Gunboat Smith. You just think about these types of opponents that he was in with Sam Langford. I mean, hell of a fighter there. And one who I think realistically, just when you look at it, there's a reason that many regard him as the greatest of all time, because he's doing things that you don't see as much today. We have some good feats or great feats that happen today. Just think about that. Terrence Crawford, he recently went up to 168 pounds. He started his career at 135, and he beat Canelo Alvarez, who was the reigning undisputed 168 pound champion there. My man Reddy McKissick Thoughts dial again. Right, or he's calling me right now, and I'm gonna try to get him on because I think he'll help to actually express this even more, just so you understand just the feat that is, or just the sheer sort of mythology that it surrounds the likes of a Sam Langford and how he came to be one of the greatest of all times for sure. So I'm going to get him on. Yeah, I'm letting them know I'm live right now, and I'll send them the link. I just need to get them the link. But just think about that. Again, folks, we're here. We're talking about the great Jack Johnson, and he is, of course, one of the greatest of all time when we think about the heavyweights that have been in the sport. Excuse me. And he went against some of the best. Sam Langford, the Nine, you name it. I mean, that's saying something right there in itself. So we're gonna continue to dive into that. I'm gonna get my man Random Acoustic Thoughts in here. Excuse me. Yeah. Apologize. I need to drink some water. Actually, well, let me get to that. But I'm gonna get Random Acoustic Thoughts in here because I think he can provide even more information in that regard because of the fact that he is one of the foremost experts there, sharing that knowledge that is associated with these guys from that particular time. And yeah, I didn't get a chance to connect with him prior to or beforehand, but he's one of those individuals where it doesn't matter because he's just going to automatically know just what's going on as it relates to the likes of Jack Johnson, because he's done so much surrounding sort of the history of that particular era that Jack Johnson has been in. So you think about the late 1800s through the early 1900s, the heavyweights that were competing. And as I noted, I don't have every single person on there who was actually involved in the sport or who was involved in the resume of Jack Johnson at that particular time. But that being said, I mean, impeccable. And the work that he put in prior to even winning the world title, I think that is one of the things that helps him stand out far beyond those, or far beyond what people know of him, because people generally know, of course, that he was the first Black world heavyweight champion. But that being said, I was saying he was so much more. You think about there's some of the other opponents that he was in the mix with there. Look at the names there. And some of them people won't know. Denver Ed Martin, and Denver Ed Martin actually taught him some stuff right there. Denver Ed Martin, I have a video on the channel that dives into his career. Denver Ed Martin, one of the most clever, probably even during this particular period of time, the most clever heavyweight in the world at that particular time. And there are quotes, notes surrounding such. Check out my video on Denver Ed Martin. Google Denver Ed or search on YouTube Denver Ed Martin. I'm the only one that's done something of this nature on Denver Ed Martin. And I think you'll get an understanding of how good Denver Ed Martin was. I mean, that's someone that Jack Johnson was in there with. Joe Butler, king of the middleweight. Just so happened, I have a video on the channel of Joe Butler, the king of the middleweights, who was a guy who fought from middleweight up, and he fought at heavyweight, all of that stuff as well. Former colored world middleweight champion. And I shall note for Denver Ed Martin, former colored world heavyweight champion. But that being said, these were top tier guys. The guy like Joe Butler, he's a guy who, you look at his resume, it won't stand out if you just look at it at face value. But you have to know a lot of his losses came at the back end of his career, and he was fighting well above what would be his typical weight there, so that's one of the things. Shout out to my man Papi Chun Yayo, heavy on the Papi, light on the Yayo. It says Jack Johnson was a man, no doubt about it there, Ernest, no doubt, the man indeed there, and one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. And hey, we're here to show him love for doing what he was able to do in the sport. And with that, I'm bringing on my man there, Random Acoustic Thoughts, who's going to help bring to light just how good this guy, Jack Johnson, was, far beyond what we see there on film as far as when he won the World Heavyweight title. So cheers there to you, Random. Appreciate you taking the time to come on there, buddy.
Big up, Josh City. How you doing, brother?
Hey, hanging in there. Can't complain at all. No doubt about it. Real quick there, Random, we got people in the chat who have been showing love and all this stuff. Shout out to my man Ernest. Be sure to check him out, folks. Papi Chun Yayo. Shout out to Jay Gribben, says Tiger Flowers, Atlanta GA. Tiger Flowers, one of the greats for sure. Another guy, Sam Langford, just so happened to be in the ring with. Just think about that. Sam Langford in there with the likes of Tiger Flowers, who was one of the great defensive fighters, one of the great middleweights and first Black world middleweight champion. So shout out there to you, Jay there. So shout out to Tiger Flowers as well, one of the greats. But be sure to check those out. And be sure to check out Random Acoustic Thoughts, folks. He's here. We're going to talk about it. He's going to show us some, he's going to give us some insight into just some of the great feats that these individuals were involved in. But it goes far beyond what the public may know just based on some of the video that is out there. Look there to your random.
Ed Johnson's a complicated character, but I think the most important thing to understand is before he beat Tommy Burns, and everyone saw him as the champion, right? He was the colored heavyweight champion since 1903, early 1903. So, but it was almost treated like a second division because the white champions had all drawn the line.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. Even the guys we like, but they did. That's what they did. Corbett, Fitz drew it on Bob Armstrong. Jeffries drew it on Denver Ed, Bob Armstrong, McVeigh, Johnson. Pretty much everyone once he became the champion. So there were two divisions. The white press didn't hold the other division in as much prestige. But if we think about fighting, the art of throwing the hands, the art of stop and send. If you draw the color line, it's at a minimum competitive at the heavyweight. And honestly, it tilts. Have most of the all-time greats in it. Only a few exceptions. So, like, the way they're written about at the time isn't always as good as they were, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Johnson was fantastic, but he was also get everything, the honest truth from any one single source. Langford and some of the other guys happened, but skill-wise, oh man, Johnson was a brilliant defensive fighter. Josh City, who do you think of like history's great defensive fighters across any weight? Oh, did he blank out? Am I monologuing? Josh, come back. Well, I'll keep talking. So Johnson didn't actually go undefeated between the time in 2003 when he won the colored title and when he beat Tommy Burns at the end of 1908. But he went undefeated against colored fighters, defending that claim. When he unified in December, suddenly, like, there was a ton of money for him. Now, not just to fight Sam Langford that next May in London, which was already signed, but apparently after the fight, he got a new manager, went back to America. He didn't want to honor that. The club, the National Sporting Club, raised the offer. Johnson still turned it down, and some other cities. He didn't want to fight Langford, really, because that was a pretty tough fight, to put it mildly. Oh, he's back. Big up. But Johnson did fight some pretty serious people. He wouldn't fight some very, very serious people, but Johnson wasn't fighting scrubs. And that's important to remember as well. Once he was briefly unified, he kind of lost the undisputed claim when he wouldn't fight Langford, because at that point, the English, the National Sporting Club, didn't recognize him for a short while as champion. They were like, Sam Langford should be the champion. You ducked him. You pretty much, but it didn't stick. Johnson was the man, and he fought some guys. Josh, nice, throwing the hands. Yo, who do you think of some of history's great defensive boxers? Oh, that's nice. Oh, you froze up, Josh. You're muted, brother.
Oh, you know what? I had my mute button on. I'm here. Appreciate you, everybody. Oh yeah, I hear you though. Oh, I was checking it. it there, and I know you mentioned the greatest defensive fighters. And my man Papi Chunyayo mentioned Willie Pep, maybe the greatest defensive fighter of all time, no doubt. Willie Pep, exceptional. You think about his footwork, movement, head movement, body movement, all of that stuff, what he was able to do. And it's not like he was just some overnight guy. We're talking 200 plus fights right here. So he's got the actual experience to back it. So he's definitely up there. His defensive style different than that of Jack Johnson's
Oh yeah.
And when you, I guess, kind of look at them from that perspective, certainly the different eras and different styles that kind of factors in. If you look at it, and we were talking about this earlier, random. Our guy, the final boss, he was in here. He was mentioning that Johnson being the greatest clinch defensive fighter ever. And you know what? I was thinking about it, and I couldn't think of a greater defensive fighter from the clinch than Johnson. And he was a heavyweight, of course, and we're talking scaling the weight classes, so that puts it into perspective. But
yeah, because he was sharp. He was harder to hit than James Toney. Although James Toney is a guy that, if you're talking about old school and you talk about a more modern guy, Toney, although his weight fluctuated, but he had the skills and the cool head. And when you see how cool he is under fire, Johnson was like that. He was often, in fact, smiling. Tony has more like the Easter Island stone face thing going on most of the time, the iron grill, but Johnson would be grinning, playing it up to the crowd. You have you in a clinch, punch a couple times, laugh at everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at
when he was able to. Now, interestingly, when he fought Langford and he kicked Langford's ass, right? Yep. Swole up one of his eyes real big, but he was actually getting frustrated because he couldn't finish Langford. Now, later, people were saying, oh, he took it easy on him and all this stuff. No. The actual contemporary reports from the writers who were there is he was getting pissed because he couldn't. And Langford was willing to mix it up. So Johnson was giving it to him, but it wasn't. Langford had that, which explains maybe why he thought twice about fighting him when Langford was now another 15 to 20 pounds heavier. Mm-hmm. And that same guy who's like, hey, we can go. So that was the thing about Langford is he had a lot of technique. He got, he got training with Belfield Walcott, the brother of Joe Walcott, the great welterweight champion. Oh, yeah. Training with Jimmy Walsh, bantamweight out of Newton, Massachusetts, west of the city. Very clever fighter indeed. And they trained for a long time. So Langford had those reflexes, but he could also just go at it. He could trade the punches. He was short. So yeah, I think it's understandable that was a fight that didn't happen, the Johnson rematch. But in the fight itself, that was the main thing. That's why the crowd was cheering Langford. But funnily enough, I might have mentioned this on another stream, Josh, but Big Sandy Ferguson, who ended up fighting Johnson multiple times, right? He was the New England heavyweight champion, basically. And he even got disqualified for kneeing Johnson in the nuts in one of their fights. But he was actually ran over to Johnson's corner and was trying to distract Langford while Johnson was kicking Langford's ass. For whatever reason. He was trouble, though. I mean, Big Sandy was the problem child. That was one of his nicknames. Isn't one of the Paul brothers go by that? They weren't the first. We're talking about the Chelsea strong boy, Big Sandy Ferguson. He was the problem child.
Yeah.
But really for like robbing people and things like that, not for good things. Oh, not so much social media, more like being a bit of a knucklehead.
Oh yeah, definitely. Hey, real quick, random. I wanted to share this really quick because I have it on the channel in a shorts video. And of course, this is like a little AI thing, but this is an actual quote from Jack Johnson on facing Sam Langford. I just wanted to share this real quick there, random, since we were talking about it. Just so you can see and this was, as mentioned, Jack Johnson facing a smaller version of Sam Langford, a middleweight Sam Langford, who wasn't even fighting at heavyweight. So you'll hear his quote himself. I'll let you be the judge there, folks, real quick.
Nobody will pay to see two black men fight for the title. I don't want to fight that little smoke. He's got a chance to win against anyone in the world. I'm the first black champion, and I'm going to be the last. Sam Langford was the toughest little son of a bitch that ever lived.
I just wanted you to hear that, folks. I just wanted you to hear that for yourself right there. What Jack Johnson himself said of Sam Langford. Of course, I threw that in the AI, but basically you get the picture. You get the understanding there yourself of what he meant. He said that Sam Langford was the toughest son of a bitch that ever lived. So the toughest little son of a bitch that ever lived. And that was his words, his quote right there. So that gives you an understanding as to why he did not want to step back in there with Sam Langford once again.
He could do a run as champion and make a tremendous amount of money without fighting Langford. Now, I think it's competitive. Like the fight they had booked in London. The thing is, London rules, you couldn't clinch. You had to clean break. You couldn't even nearly hit a guy when he was down or hit on separation because you get DQ'd instantly. They were so hardcore there. So it would actually been tougher for Johnson than if they fought in, like, say, California, where he could clinch, he could just grind on him, shoulder bumps, hold him, lean on him. But the thing was, Langford liked that shit. He was incredibly strong. So, and fighters would either learn to, like, fight a little bit on the retreat or more artfully, or they would get banged out because you just couldn't go toe to toe with Langford. No one wanted to. He would have to chase dangerous fighters, and some of them wouldn't fight him for any money. Beggar Sam. But where this is about Johnson was avoided too. Jeffries didn't want to fight him. He got to fight some other heavy duty guys. Marvin Hart got a close decision over him, which is controversial, but thing was, Marvin Hart, the Kentucky Wonder, he was an offensive fighter. He had a national reputation as an offensive, come forward fighter, and Johnson fought the other way. Pick your shots, those wonderfully tight uppercuts on entry, but it's not as pleasing. And so some refs just liked aggression. That's not to say there wasn't something weird about it, because apparently they were saying, well, surely Johnson hit him enough in there that he should have won it because Hart didn't land very much. But aggression, we know from judging, aggression, it does add up. If you're Ray Leonard, the flurries at the end of the rounds, or Calzaghe, those steal rounds because they're just like, look, you just threw like 14 punches, maybe only 3 landed, but you were all offense. So Johnson didn't really have that. He was capable of it, but that wasn't his style. He wasn't a take giant risks fighter. And the only reason he was able to floor Ketchel was a much smaller guy. Johnson had his measure by then easily.
Mm-hmm.
Ketchel was the whirlwind, but Johnson was a cool-headed customer. He was a brilliant stylist, especially by then. So he didn't have any meaningful chance. And some of the footage of him with Jim Flynn, he was schooling him again. Flynn just can't get inside. He can't figure him out. It's chess and checkers. Langford was a different kind of fighter, a different kind of challenge. But what's funny is after Johnson beat Burns, a surprising amount of writers were saying that either Ketchel or Langford was the answer to Johnson. They didn't think the big fellas could do it. He's too clever and fast for the big guys. But they thought the power and speed of Ketchel and Langford. So it was pretty weird that 2 middleweights were considered in the top handful of contenders to fight the heavyweight champion.
Yeah,
the first undisputed heavyweight champion.
Yeah, that
of the gloved era. Jack Johnson, the actual first undisputed gloved era champion.
No doubt about that. And if you don't know what that means there, folks, you think about it. So John L. Sullivan, he was crowned the first world champion in boxing history when he fought Jake Kilrain in a bare knuckle contest in 1899. But here's the thing. John L. Sullivan did not fight black fighters. So therefore, it was not necessarily undisputed because you had guys like C.C. Smith, who came a little bit before, but you had guys like George Godfrey, the original Old Chocolate George Godfrey, who he was at one point apparently going to fight. Then you had guys like the Black Prince Peter Jackson, who at that particular time, when Sullivan won that title, no doubt was the best heavyweight in the world outside of John L. Sullivan, and he never fought the Black Prince Peter Jackson. I chronicled that in the video on my channel there on John L. Sullivan, on whether he fought the best of the best there, and it's for you to judge on your own. But when Jack Johnson defeated Tommy Burns, that was the first time we had the colored world heavyweight champion, the reigning colored world heavyweight champion, that he had been in with the others who had held this title, facing off against the world heavyweight champion, at least from that lineage, thinking about the Police Gazette that stemmed from the bare knuckle world onto what ultimately became what we know it to be here under the Marquess of Queensberry rule. So that's why Jack Johnson was essentially the first undisputed world heavyweight champion.
Yeah, and it's, boxing hasn't quite yet confronted the ugliness of the past. Baseball has done it now. Some of those records change because they're like Negro Leagues. Those are some of the best players of all time. Why can't they get their shine just because they were segregated? at its time, boxing should be doing that too. It would be tough combing through the different claims and things because, say late in Langford's career, a couple papers in the Southwest were joking that he was still fighting people for a color title. He couldn't beat Wills by that point. This is way at the end of his career, half blind. But he was beating a lot of other guys, but he couldn't beat Wills. And the claim, he was still fighting. The promoters were still promoting the bouts as such. So it would be hard to tangle through at certain points. But in general, there's a pretty good lineage. I mean, because the press were pretty harsh. Even the racist press were harsh about people usurping a claim as champion. Even when like Jack O'Brien's having like 22 fights in a year and he's trying to make a claim, I think it was 158 pounds in the early 1900s, very big. But the championship was 154, was middleweight. That was where Dempsey lost, the original non-Paral Dempsey lost to Fitz. So some years later, they were in the early 1890s. So like, there was so even though Jack O'Brien, he kind of established a claim as he was still a big fight and was fighting everybody, lots of Philly 6-rounders. So like the titles are complex, but Johnson was the first guy who got his opportunity, won that.
Hey, yeah. And random in that regard and Poppy, burned 30K, which is $1 million a day, 5K for Johnson, folks. Just think about that. But I wanted to note, and if you think about the claims just in general, so pretty much even what we consider to be the World Heavyweight Championship that was established via what you consider to be claimed, and that was substantiated, and that was, I guess you could say, approved and ushered in by the National Police Gazette, because at that particular time there, the National Police Gazette, that was the leading media for boxing at that particular, you could say other sports as well, but the National Police Gazette there in the late 1800s, they were the leading media. So when John L. Sullivan defeated Patty Ryan, the National Police Gazette did not recognize John L. Sullivan as the world heavyweight champion. It was a bare knuckle fight, mind you, all folks. So they did not recognize them. And then it turned into a bit of rivalry between John L. Sullivan and the guy who would eventually become the National Police Gazette owner, Richard Cal Fox. So that substantiation of John L. Sullivan from that point becoming the world heavyweight champion did not happen until John L. Sullivan defeated Jake Kilrain in 1889, when he was then recognized. The National Police Gazette substantiated such. So you think about that. So that was 1889. Now, mind you, the National Police Gazette, prior to that, they substantiated and recognized Charles Smith, C.C. Smith, as the first colored world heavyweight champion. No different than how they did with the world heavyweight champion, right? So those are the types of things that people don't know of and probably have been unaware of, that really breaks it down even further. So when you think about it and how some of these claims and some of these title reigns and lineage and establishment of such were substantiated, it was through media, why media is still, and I guess you could say, certainly at that time, one of the major and most powerful forces in the sports. But put that in mind. I just wanted to put that in folks' mind there, random. The fact that the National Police Gazette is what substantiated Sullivan as the world heavyweight champion. They substantiated the first colored world heavyweight championship or champion, and we have the lineage of both. So therefore, that adds more credence to Jack Johnson being the first undisputed world heavyweight champion.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to just zoom all the way out on the great legacy of the heavyweight division, best way I would say you go, there were branches, then there was Jack Johnson briefly. He wouldn't fight Langford, then there were branches. And then when he lost in 1915, there was a color line, so there were branches. Until Joe Louis, the great Joe Louis, came in a good fight, took out Braddock with one of the greatest combos of all time. Left hook to the bicep, right rocket to the chin. just one of the. It's my favorite knockout. And I think it's the kind of overhand where it's a real rocket. So he picks up his back. I think he might have picked up his back leg, like that fulcrum point style thing. I can't quite remember if it's that punch. He would do that sometimes. He hit him with everything. Braddock wasn't even sure where the floor was. So he kind of just but anyway, and then Lewis just went on a tear defending that newly reunified lineage. So that's why for some people, and the thing is, the people who either had the line drawn on them or were drawing the line still fought some good fighters. They weren't fighting scrubs. Even Johnson, when he was other than Jim Johnson, battling Jim, he didn't fight anything but white fighters for a period of years for his what would have been undisputed reign, although at different times people weren't recognizing him for different reasons. He made himself unpopular, especially when he broke the contract with Langford. That was held against him because they were like, "What are you doing? It's already signed." But anyway. But he still fought some good fighters. All these other fighters, Dempsey and stuff, Tunney, they still fought some excellent fighters because there's no rule about what you have to look like to kick a lot of ass and be great in the ring. Oh, yeah. Just to make that clear, because we're talking color line and people avoiding, but they still fought some badass dudes. It's clear. It's important to remember that. But as far as the flashes, the reason Joe Louis always resonates is because Johnson was there, but he still was avoiding certain guys. Lewis came in and was like, "Yo, line them up. I'll come to your city and kick your ass in front of your own people," and just went on the tour. Now, they called it the bum of the month, but they weren't bums. He was fighting a lot of fighters who were ranked top 3 in their careers. Yeah. An awful lot of them, and an awful lot of those wins were knockouts. He was a real machine. Lewis was special. So I just wanted to say that. Johnson and Lewis, there's a reason why they resonate throughout history. What they did was monumental in that unfortunate racist landscape that they were navigating.
Yeah, and so no, that's great that you pointed that out there, Random. And so from that point, certainly there, from the point of Lewis, then you can see where the lineage just kind of carried on, where regardless of race or whatever it may be, you generally had the best individuals fighting there for that title. And of course, it then expanded out where we had multiple belts in multiple weight classes, of course. So it's a little different getting, or not just that, but multiple belts in a single weight class that sort of equal up to what becomes considered as the undisputed champion or whatever it may be here to this day. So it's a little bit different in that sense. But when you take a guy like Alexander Usyk right now, so he would be sort of the lineage, the holder of the lineage, the man that beat the man right now, because he beat Tyson Fury, who held the lineal title at that particular time. But also, you think about it from the perspective, he had all 4 of the major titles, the ring title, so that pretty much solidifies it right there. And for the most part there. And generally, if you're going to have all of the titles, including the ring, then you're going to end up being the one who carries on that lineage, because the lineal title likely will be online in that case. And generally is when you have 1 and 2 go against each other and face off. So I wanted to note that right there. So when you think about Usyk, now he was the heavyweight. Certainly he is the man that beat the man and ties back all the way to this lineage that was initially established there with John L. Sullivan. But of course, when you think about Jack Johnson from an undisputed standpoint with the points that we had mentioned.
Yeah, good. All great points there, 86. Keep on shadow boxing, brother. Tuck that chin. Hey,
I'm stepping in there.
What will Papa Jack say? He said, keep that chin tucked. Yeah, so it's always important to remember that just like today, fighters can avoid certain matchups for whatever reason. Now, it's uglier when it's over race, because it's like, what the hell are you doing, man? This is sports. And there were people back then saying that, right? But the whole 2-division thing, there were newspaper writers who referenced the 2nd division for the color championship, but the champion, Jeffries. Now, the unfortunate thing for Johnson was after he beat Burns did go international. He went around kicking butts around the world, making tons of money. But some of the writers still considered Jeffries the guy, right? Because he was kind of the lineal guy, the lineal white titleist. And a lot of the white writers were, within drawing the color line, there were always concerns that, oh, people are going to get uppity. They wouldn't say it that literal word, but that's the kind of sentiment that was there. We don't want people to start thinking they're superior, let alone not equal, but superior because they've got the heavyweight championship because of what it meant at the time to society. So there's a lot of ugliness.
Mind you, there, Random, Jeffries did have the opportunity to defend his title against Jack Johnson prior to him retiring there in 1904, and he could have solidified it then. And it was not guaranteed that Johnson would have won because Jeffries, he was certainly a force at that particular time.
Yeah, I mean, so in 03, when he beat Denver Martin and then defended very quickly, I think in like a month later against Sam McVeigh, they were heavier than him. McVeigh was just over 200 pounds from the start of his career. He was like a Tyson guy. He was just always big from when he was boxing. Big unit of a guy. But Johnson handled him. Johnson was in the 180s, maybe the low 180s at that time. So I think I remember seeing a negotiation a little bit before then where he was saying he could 175 was the lowest he could make for some to fight. I forget who, but another prominent fighter. But so Johnson would have been giving up good, I don't even know how heavy Jeffrey. He was a big boy. He was a unit by then.
200 plus, essentially.
But he was already past his athletic youth. Jeffries was when he did retire, when he finally announced, even before he announced it in 05, but in 04. So in 03, yeah, it would have been a competitive fight. Jeffries was good, but I think Johnson was just too clever for him.
Yeah.
Jeffries had a good style for fighters who weren't geniuses at entry and exit, but Johnson was. By then he was like, but yeah, I mean, Jeffries had a heck of a punch and he had a real chin on him. So it's hard to say for sure, but I think Johnson did have the cleverness. That's what he was known for. He earned that, but he wasn't like super offensive. So who knows? Yeah, Jeffries wasn't going to dance. He wasn't going to dance around. So it might be hard on him.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jeffries, if you take what he was able, if you take some of the, I guess, his high profile fights there, one of the things that, of course, would have been his strong suit at that particular time, of course, his size and his endurance, because he was an individual who did have great endurance, just given his size, but he was an athlete, as mentioned, as you noted there, and maybe not quite at that same peak level, but he was no doubt an athlete and he was a strong guy. And Johnson, I think, certainly could outbox him because Jeffries, he was outboxed by some other opponents, but he found a way to get the job done and knocked him out. I think about him with Fitz and, of course, Corbett. They were able to outbox him, but they couldn't hold on and withstand the punishment from Jeffries for long enough to be able to last the distance in those longer contests. So the rounds could have played a factor as well. But I do think Johnson, he was sort of hitting that entering or at least starting the point of entering or getting it, or in his prime up until that point, somewhere in there. I'm thinking maybe, would you say started to enter his prime or somewhere around there? So that would have made it very interesting.
Yeah, I would say by 03, Johnson wasn't his full 200-pound-ish type guy yet, but he was superb, and he could handle bigger guys. Sandy Ferguson was a big old fella. He just didn't have the discipline, and he was a dirty fighter too sometimes. Obviously he was kneeing him in the Johnson, kneed Johnson in the Johnson and got DQ'd in Chelsea.
Right there, because Ferguson, folks, about 6'3", 200 plus, well over 200 pounds right there. So bigger than Jeffries, but of course Jeffries is a better fighter. But that being said, let's think about that.
Yeah, and Jeffries was a tank. He could take a lot. That was part of his trick. He was freakishly strong. He was huge guy, big frame, not just a big gangly mess, but he was like a big frame. It's like Denver Martin, Bob Armstrong. They were big fellas, but Bob Armstrong, when he got older, was filled out a lot. But when he was fighting, he wasn't particularly wide. Jeffries was absolutely that, and he was I'm trying to remember, Josh. You said, was it Tommy Ryan helped teach him the finer subtleties? Because Tommy Ryan was an absolute expert.
Yeah, it was Tommy Ryan. Definitely Tommy Ryan was training him around that time, and they had a little dispute there regarding payment for some of the trainings. And Ryan Folks, of course, former middleweight and welterweight champion. So he was one of the best boxers. Just think about it from a fundamental standpoint in the sport. Certainly seen to that point.
Yeah, so Jeffries, it wasn't that he was without technique. It's just that though he could be sometimes hit, he could take it. And then could people take it from him? Because he packed a hell of a wallop. So, but I mean, I know Jeffrey said later Johnson could have licked him at any point. Maybe that is true, but it's hard to say, you know, when he doesn't feel this. By the time they actually fought in 1910, I mean, he was long past it. So would have been a great fight, though. I mean, it's a fight that should have happened. There were a bunch of fights that should have happened that didn't. We have some of more recent generations. We go, oh, the fight that got away, but there were a lot of them back in those days. Unfortunately, champions would sometimes sort of kind of hold the title hostage. Jim Corbett was the worst. He was just doing theater appearances. Tons of them. So he'd be sparring, but he wouldn't be defending his title. I think he just fought the one successful defense in all the time he had. So it was a strange time, but there were so many great fighters around at the different weights. And back then, as a large fighter, you had to deal with speed because, like now, don't you have to make the bottom end of the weight class to fight in that bracket? Is that the case? Oh, maybe Josh is off. But anyway, so like there were fighters who were in like the 170s who might fight someone who's like 230. But it's a speed equation because at a certain point, it gets really hard for the big guy to just keep up. And even if it's a tip tap and he's not knocked out, he can be outpointed. So it was a different kind of dynamic then and there was precedent. We've said this in a previous show, Josh, like Fitz was a middleweight champion, right? That's how he made his fame. But then he went up and won the heavyweight championship. Part of Jeffrey's thing was he was able to beat Fitz, and Fitz was a special guy. Then Fitz like went down to light heavy and got himself a third title. But later, even later, when he wasn't even in a factor, Fitz was saying, well, I never lost the middleweight title at 154 and I'm still that champion too, you know, which is technically he didn't lose it there. He just outgrew it, but he claimed he could still make it. So it was like there was like a really weird texture in this time about claims and things. And there's even in the papers, Josh, and I think it was in 04, early 04, John L. Sullivan, he's old. He looks like Wilford Brimley. You know, diabetes. And he's just like, he's a big old Warlson guy, but he was like in the papers getting salty, defending he was broke by then, but he was defending that he was champion. Like you were saying before, like not everyone always recognized people. Well, he was trying to go through because people have been in the papers saying he was never really champion. Or they would say some weirdness like he held the title, but he was never champion or some like parsing the words a bit like but like he was actually having to say, well, I fought this guy and this guy. But I think some of that was over the color line, not all of it, but so, you know, just like today, you know, fighters can make that money, but you can't buy legacy and people will question, you know, like Mayweather for all his greatness.
Yeah, no,
there aren't as many people. Like there are a lot of people who consider other people the all-time greats just because they had much tougher careers. They weren't as choosy. In spite of the fact that he went undefeated and fought a lot of great fighters and got the W, you know, for his professional career. So, but there's still a lot of people, even with losses, where they go, yeah, but he was no Muhammad Ali. He's not fighting like the vast majority of the top 10 fighters across 2 different decades. Yeah. You know, in a golden age, you know, not if you're retiring for a year and then find a guy you think you could beat and come back, a good guy, but a guy you think you can beat, like lines up nice and get that money and then take another year and a half off and stuff. You know, so I think Jeffries, you know, is a little bit of a victim of that. He didn't fight a lot. Johnson did an awful lot of work before he beat Tommy Burns, and then he fought some names. And so he wasn't just a controversial, like, nobody. He fought a lot. He fought a who's who. And guys who've been drawing the line, you know, some of them pulled it back up to get that money.
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
There it is. There it is.
So many people. You think about guys. Some people don't know about guys like young Peter Jackson. We think
Great
about
fighter.
Frank Moran, the guy who fought for the world heavyweight title. Of course, folks, we don't know Joe Kowinski. he was locked up with Joe Kowinski in jail. Kowinski taught him for things, or they had, they got to spend time sparring and all of that stuff. Hank Griffin, super underrated.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it was Choinski and Kid Carter that got arrested at the Criterion when the crackdown in Boston in the end of 2003.
Interesting.
Choinski getting arrested all over the place, poor fella.
Hey, and Kid Carter, he was nice as well.
I'm pretty sure it was him and Kid Carter in their seconds. They all got arrested. Judge Emmons, the police commissioner, he'd been a judge in East Boston and been really harsh on the boxing there, kind of run him out. And then, he got appointed, and but it was also anti-gambling. Like, it was a whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of gambling. That's why the fans and the press hated prearranged draws, because how can you gamble on a thing that's going to be a draw if no one gets knocked out?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that, it doesn't tell the full story either there with some of those prearranged draws. So that's why you have to look certainly deeper than just the record at face value right there, because you have those types of things. And when you think about individuals who have a lot of draws in their resumes, you have to take those type of things into account as well, because a lot of that happened. And just think about
there was a lot of weird arrangements. Yeah. Like Johnson, when he fought young Peter Jackson, he lost the challenge because he couldn't stop young Peter Jackson inside the rounds that he said. Yeah, so he lost the winner's end of the purse, but he won the fight. He won the action. But as far as would you call that a win or a loss? Because Joe Walcott had to stop Kid Levine to beat him, and that's considered a loss.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just the wording of the contract or a double standard. I'm not sure. But Johnson had to stop young Peter Jackson. He couldn't. And young Peter Jackson could go, man. He was the main training partner in corner two of the great Joe Gans.
Yeah, no doubt.
Top two or three lightweight by any reasonable measure of all time.
Super tough. Smaller, but if you look at him, you look at his build and everything, you can tell that he was built for work. And that's what you see in his resume, his overall record, the amount of fights and all of that stuff that he had right there. And you're right. And sometimes
he was great out of the clinch. Oh, sorry, gosh.
No, you're good. But sometimes those prearranged draws, as you noted there with that, having to knock a fighter out, that screwed up a lot of resumes, or if you look at it at face value, that's why you have to actually look into the actual resumes and not just the record at face value, because those draws and things of that nature, they don't always fill the full picture.
Exactly. And that's, we're talking about championship by acclaim, and the currency for a fighter was reputation, because they didn't have a lot of video. So it was reputation, how you did against the guys of your own section. And then when you traveled or guys traveled into your area, how you did against them, people with a regional or a national or an international reputations. So for Langford, when he beat Patsy Sweeney, November 20th, that got covered widely, right? Stopping Patsy Sweeney was like a serious thing. Sweeney was a very well-known fighter. He'd been famous for several seasons already. But he didn't get an international reputation until he beat Joe Gans in December. At that point, he was known everywhere. Everywhere that talks about boxing would make note that he beat Sam Langford of Cambridge, they were saying at the time, beat him 15 rounds of the Criterion on points at catch weights. So even though he didn't win the championship, that was his reputation. But that was true of all kinds of fighters. And so like Jack Blackburn, right, his two most famous quote unquote wins in the press at the time were over Joe Gans and Sam Langford. Neither of them were actually wins. Yep. Press didn't care. It was a 6-round no decision against Joe Gans in Philly, and he got the best of things by almost all the newspaper accounts. They called it a win. It's officially a no decision, right? Because they wouldn't allow it in Philly. If there's no stoppage, it's. And then he drew with Sam Langford. The next fight Sam Langford had after beating Joe Gans, the great Joe Gans.
Yep.
And who didn't lose again, at least on points officially, for years. But then they had a prearranged draw with Blackburn, but Blackburn got the best of things, and so they started calling that a win. It was prearranged draw, money split even, right? So they would say Jack Blackburn of Philadelphia, who has wins over Sam Langford and Joe Gans. They didn't care.
Insane. Jack Blackburn, folks, if you don't know, one of the greatest of all time, should be in the Hall of Fame as a fighter. Just think about that right there.
Right, especially when you put into the perspective of, by the standards of the day, those were considered wins. He got the best of both of those guys. The fact that there were like technical arrangements, they pretty much disregarded that as far as when they were doing the, what do they say, boxing math? What's the term? Like, we have MMA math, but is there a clever little phrase for boxing? But when you're doing the triangulation to see who the top guys are, they didn't care if it was a prearranged draw. If it was an important fight, they just call it what it was. So, yeah, so that might be part of why Blackburn isn't more famous, because if he had official wins over Gans and Langford, when they were both like world-class talent, that would change. That would add to his resume considerably.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's a complicated thing. And there were a lot of great fighters. A lot of great fighters in boxing history never got a title shot, colored or white, or, you know, no kind of title.
Yeah.
Beyond maybe regional or national ones.
Yeah, you only had that one opportunity back then. Just think about that. Some of the greatest to never have won a title. And a lot of people think about those in recent memory. But of course, think pre-1900s. It's a slew of them, you know. And some of them were common opponents of each. You know, when I think about Blackburn, as we were noting and talking about there, there's a reason I have a Blackburn shirt for sale there on the channel. But he fought a guy, George Elbows McFadden, you know what I'm saying? Another guy who never got a title shot right there, who had his own defensive prowess back in the day. Said he used his elbow, you know, to block punches, you know, pretty much in this way. And you can see drawing depiction of such. We don't have video footage of him, but one of those guys who was there in the pocket will probably be using his elbows in this way as punches were coming in. People don't know about him.
And back before it was banned, like, he knew how to like trap your arm, you know what I mean? Make your elbow funny, like slip the jab and then kind of like jam his forearm against your upper arm using his head as the fulcrum point. Like, he was, you know, you could say he was a dirty fighter. He wasn't a huge guy. He was a lightweight. So, but he was able. He also patented the noiseless speed back.
No, I didn't know that. Crazy.
I can't remember what year I found that clipping. I think it was like 02 or 1903. Yeah, the noise, so it had like a rubber rim, so and no top board, so it would bounce off the rim. But yeah, so he was a good guy, but he was supposed to fight Langford twice in 1903 and pulled out twice. The first time he pulled out in May, and Langford fought Andy Watson, one of his local regional rivals. Andy Watson's great fighter, but real technician. I never stopped that I'm aware of in his whole career. But he was the king of the prearranged draw. He fought a lot of them.
Okay, yeah. I know you're talking about Professor there.
But yeah, Professor Watson, man, he did all kinds, and including becoming the instructor at Harvard when they revived it. And, you know, Harvard had a tradition because Teddy Roosevelt boxed at Harvard before he was president, when he was at Harvard.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So when they brought it back, I'm pretty sure they brought it back not too long after the ban in Boston, Harvard's in Cambridge. So they revived it. And that's when, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's when Watson got, was appointed professor. But a lot of guys who taught would call themselves professor. There was tons of them. Yeah. It was just a way of just saying you're more than just a fighter, more like a fighter instructor.
Yeah, but, and, you know, I've considered doing a video on Teddy. He was legit, folks, if you don't know there. So he would actually train, you know, and there's rumors. I don't know if it's been 100% substantiated that he and John L. Sullivan may have sparred. There's certainly rumors out there of such. So Teddy Roosevelt, he was serious about that boxing work that he would put in, but he was an athlete just in general, but boxing's what he tended to gravitate towards, and he and John L. Sullivan were good friends.
Yeah, and so like in spite of a lot of opposition to boxing on moral grounds or anti-gambling crusaders or law and order types, but there was a prestige and a history of it. And, you know, and in England at the National Sporting Club, you know, that was heavy duty. You know, they pretty much set what was happening as far as the English titles. And I guess so when Johnson and Langford were supposed to fight in May of 1909, when Johnson declined the fight, Langford ended up fighting for the English heavyweight title. But after he won it, he left. He wasn't get Johnson there. He left elsewhere for more money. And then, so they didn't like him much either. Like no one was showing him the love, but they were trying to put the money up, make a big fight happen. But he beat the English champ. But like, that's what sometimes people would do. So like Joe Jeanette, Sam McVeigh, fighting for championship of France, a national title, because Tommy Burns had been going around fighting national champs, either in the States where he was based out of Detroit, even though he was Canadian born. Or I should say early in his career, he was out of Detroit, but or he'd fight him overseas. So a lot of the colored fighters where the line was being drawn on, they would go win a national championship.
Mm-hmm.
So, McVeigh went to Australia as well. So did Langford fight for the Australian title. Or, so it got really complicated, but the national titles meant a lot because there weren't a lot of titles overall. So if you're considered the best boxer based in that country or representing that country, there was a pull in the press for the champion to face them, to be the world champ and not just the champion of America. Go fight the world, the best from around the world. So Joe Louis did a lot of fighting in the US, but the idea was similar. Go fight everybody. Just make it absolutely crystal clear that you're the man, because you're not ducking any. You're just going in this run of fights. Hank Armstrong did it at welterweight,
Oh yeah.
And to me, that's pure greatness. When you just go on this massive run, but a quick run. There's no time to regroup and strategize. You just blast through a bunch of guys. It's part of what made Tyson such a megastar.
Oh yeah.
He's always now that was the video age and the TV age, but back in the press, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, partly the reason he got famous, he fought a ton of times a year.
Yeah.
Almost 24 times a year for several seasons. Patsy Sweeney had done it, fight 15 or 16 times a year for several seasons. That way you're always in the press. Once or twice a month, you got a fight result in the press. And so that builds into reputation back when the written word was so, so very important. Johnson had to do that too.
Oh yeah.
Everyone had to do it. Reputations was very important. So it's different today. You can manufacture it a lot more easily. Even though there's more detail, there's an overflow of information. Back then, you didn't get a lot in the press. Kind of harsh. You've seen that, Josh, right? When you're researching these guys, they're quick to turn on a fighter with a bad performance.
No, yeah, they didn't cut him any slack for sure. I can tell you that, no doubt about it. There. And real quick, Papi Chuñeño says, y'all make sure you don't tiptoe around the subject. Say what it really was. The same racism that existed then still exists now. The newspapers didn't give folks a fair cover, just like now. So I will say some of that exists, no doubt about it. The thing about today, in terms of how media is covered, or at least generally, and of course we have more access now than ever as far as the amount of, I guess, potential opportunities for people to share their information or their name, share their name or their content specifically from their own names or their own organizations or whomever they are affiliated with. We have more of that available now just through the likes of social media, so on and so forth. And what I tended to see is that one of the things that separates sort of the top guys now, or those individuals that I see who have been on and elevated in the world of media covering boxing, and you may see some of this with MMA as well, is they're more geared towards the being first on announcing something there. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, such and such is going to be fighting such and such. Therefore, I'm the first to report it. This person is the first to report it, and they get some form of credibility for such. You know what I'm saying? And hey, there's a world for that, and there's no taking away from that, certainly. But you've seen a lot of people get elevated just from being in certain spots, and therefore it turns into this sort of cyclical or inherently, I guess, corporate type of media thing where if anyone is breaking any new news, it goes through these same individuals who are tied to this specific entity or whatever. I think about the guys, the Coppinger guy. He was with this one group. He's now with The Ring. I think about him. I think about you had guys like Raphael, ESPN, their big platform or whatever, breaking that first. And of course, people are going to go to that big platform and you can get sort of clout and things of that nature by that big platform. So I wanted to note that piece of it there first there. And what you mentioned there, Ernest, in terms of, and you also mentioned even Bud gets crucified, same with Mayweather. So you do have some of that. You have a lot of people who are, you have the traditional journalists, and then you have the sort of non-traditional journalists in the sense of those individuals that went to school in, or the journalists being those individuals who went to school, got a degree in journalism or whatnot. So you're seeing more opinions and hearing more from individuals who weren't necessarily that particular route in general, or whatever it may be. But yeah, you're right. There is some criticism of guys like Crawford and Mayweather and things of that nature that are out there. And I think you'll continue to see that generally as time goes on. And I think that depending on the space in media, that you'll see more of that in certain areas or from certain groups or whatever it may be than what you will see with others. So I think we're going to see even more of that here as time goes on, just by virtue of the fact that things are so more, I guess, available and accessible now for just any individual to be able to come and share their opinion and all of that information just now. And hey, you can build up a following. You can build up a following in a non-traditional route, I guess you could say. And hey, you can share your opinion. You're going to have people that are going to latch on, and they're going to kind of latch on to that opinion. You may have some who have some pushback, just like you had some who had some pushback then. But history, I think, is ultimately is what going to define and really truly shape out and share and provide information and opinions that those who are watching and kind of going through it at that particular time can judge for themselves right there, for sure. And yeah, and no doubt, Ali, he wasn't as widely regarded. He wasn't regarded. He was sort of an enemy of the press and an enemy of the casual fan at the time that he was fighting. And it wasn't until he was seen in sort of a vulnerable state there when he lit the Olympic torch in 1996 that he was viewed in the light that he became this sort of mega star just from an overall perspective, extending beyond just the fighting career, even though he had been doing many things from a humanitarian standpoint and talking about some of the discrepancies that were out there from a racial standpoint at the time that he was fighting and all of that stuff. So there's no doubt that that is going to be the case.
Yeah, and Ali, there's lots of great clips on YouTube of interviews he did here, but also overseas in England, where he'll challenge people's perception. You know what I mean? He's very charming, but he's also had a wonderful combination of charm, but also ruthlessness. So he says stuff in polite company. Oh, you don't say that. And he's like, well, I'm saying, like I'm that guy. I'm going to say, so that's part of his greatness too. There's many levels, but even just purely as a sporting man, as a competitor, his level of opposition is just absurd. And he fought in a rich era. So certain fighters, say for Harry Greb, a rich era, fought across 3 divisions at the highest. He fought like middleweight and light heavy at the highest level, and then also fought a lot of heavyweight bouts. And then you have like Langford, who fought across multiple divisions in rich era. Just madness. But then you have guys like Ali, where it's like it was a rich heavyweight era specifically, and he was a heavyweight as a pro, and he just tore through it. So there's a reason he resonates, the reason Joe Louis resonates, and Jack Johnson as well, because it's hard to imagine now, but the press actually, from my observation, the press actually got more racist in boxing after Johnson beat Tommy Burns. So there was some whitewashing going on, especially once Dempsey was champ. Yeah. A lot of revisionism. So you could look at something from 1921 that's completely wrong about what happened 15 or 10 years earlier, because it's some egghead in the Midwest or some guy, who's just racist, and he's just rewriting things and just saying what he wants to be true. So that's one of the things with research is being old doesn't make it accurate. It's about, is it contemporary or is it just also old? But old after the fact, there's stuff Langford said in 1924 doesn't appear to line up with what happened. Johnson has different versions of different events in his career depending on when he was saying it.
Oh yeah.
Guys are entertainers. It's understandable. There are guys now doing it. Tyson Fury, he went out on social media saying he was undisputed. People are like, we missed that, brother. Having them at different times isn't undisputed. You have pieces, bits and pieces. It's very impressive, but he actually said, so, it's like, but 50 years from now, you go back like, yo, Tyson Fury, man, he was undisputed. He said so. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think there's more commonality between them then and now than differences, even though it's dramatically different. The gloves, the rules. And keep in mind, folks, in your fantasy matchups, when they fight and where they fight and the size of that ring makes a huge difference. Because if you're going back to Jack Johnson, Sam Langford's time, Joe Jeanette, Sam McVeigh, in a lot of those jurisdictions, you could kidney punch. Imagine if you're sparring and suddenly everyone's allowed to throw the kidney punches. Get real close to, get one arm around you and just tag the kidneys with the other arm.
Oh yeah.
That's no joke. It changes everything. Now make the gloves really small and do it. Do it in MMA gloves. Just tagging those kidneys. So the idea of Johnson on the inside, part of the danger was they weren't particularly large gloves. So even though he wasn't a power puncher, when he through his upper body and he'd jam that uppercut on when the guy was coming in after he found the angle, like it hit hard. So it's different rules. So like with a lot of the fantasy matchups, a lot of guys were specialists. Oh, my fault. I'm specialists in their own era.
Oh yeah.
And so when we went to neutral ground, but sometimes they might era or the version of it, because Langford also fought and other guys also fought in England where it was a lot different. It was a clean boxing at distance. Whereas you go to California, Jim Flynn with Langford, he was throwing elbows, headbutts. He was doing it with Johnson too, elbows and headbutts, overthrowing those hooks. It wasn't just Marciano and Tyson capable of that. That's an old trick. Throw 3 hooks, but the last one's really an elbow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like an over the top elbow, downward elbow, some high boxing thing or something. So it's, there's a lot of difference. But so like when we talk about guys couldn't come today and compete with how big the guys are, well, in the big old gloves, in the more restrictive rule set, maybe that's the case. You take them back where you could get around the side of the guy and change it. Being big, your kidneys aren't big. Well, bigger, just not very capable outclassed back then. Not all. I think someone like Lennox Lewis, because he had that rough style he could fight with, I think he would probably bulldoze guys back in the day too. He wouldn't be as jabby. He would be rushing dudes and just kicking the shit out of them because he was an absolute unit.
Yeah, he's a big dude to deal with for sure. Too.
Right, but other guys maybe not so much. But I think Tyson at his best, he could have done well at any time. Can you imagine Tyson Dempsey?
Oh yeah,
young Tyson, early Tyson. I mean, I would pick Tyson to win that, but that would be just an amazing fight because Dempsey, he was a little more, he was a hooker, but like he could crack. And in those little gloves, I don't know, man. I know he could take some, so that'd be a good fight while it lasted. Dempsey, so even though Dempsey was sort of like drew the color line, he was a really, really good fighter. Really good fighter. He became a really good fighter, I should say.
When he throw that Dempsey roll, he have up in there.
Yeah,
Dempsey roll, he'd be throwing that in the mix. That'd be interesting right there. I do like Tyson well. That'll be a heck of a fight because there's some inspiration there from just visible standpoint in terms of how the how Tyson sort of wore his trunks, that the haircut he had, took some of that from Dempsey, kind of just walk out there.
Yeah, he
You
wanted
know,
people to be scared of him. He wanted that psychological edge.
yeah, that fade, that high fade, and yeah, just the dark trunks. Hey, nothing else. There's something about that. That would be a crazy fight right there. Just thinking about it. I do like Iron Mike to do his thing. You never know, but oh yeah, that would be insane. When just think about those fantasy matchups. But and realistically, yeah, they're one of the things that makes them sort of tough and nearly impossible to sort of really put into perspective is the fact that their the eras were so different, just from the overall conditions and such. And I think that stuff factors in. Like I know I saw something where Mayweather said that he went through more than Muhammad Ali did, and I don't agree with it. No, in terms of more racism or whatever other things, scrutiny and all of that stuff. Of course, we're in the social
Yeah,
media age. It
that's
just
some stupid shit to say. He did
right,
face a lot of adversity. He even had to buy out his own contract. So it's not to down Mayweather, but that is a stupid thing for a man to say.
but
It's
yeah,
not
it
even the
was
same. He hasn't even grown up in the same kind of world. It's not racism. It's
very
overt
different.
racism.
Right.
No one's and like you take it back to Johnson there. Like, okay, so today people are racist, right? There's a lot of biased coverage. There's even coverage where there are channels that are more interested in either Latino fighters or Eastern European fighters or just white fighters in general or colored fighters in general. They kind of, they like cheering people who look like them. That's always been true. But what we don't have today is like, oh, you don't give this guy a title shot. You don't want a black man like giving these people hope that there's some kind of even near equality and the basic essence of people, and that, black people, their highest aspiration is to be subjugated by the white man. Like people would say that shit in major press. You don't have that today.
Yeah.
No one was saying that about Mayweather, even if they were racist, even if they were resentful and they didn't like this brash young superstar making his own rules, but it's not the same. And I can tell you, because like in my book, I don't amplify that nonsense because I feel it makes a writer untrustworthy because they're trying to be inaccurate because they have an agenda. But there's a lot of language I've had to see that I didn't deserve to see. But like in the research, I have to see these guys, especially there's one guy in one of the Chicago newspapers. Oh man, he's terrible. He's not the only one, but like and the hatred of Joe Gans. So like there are people who like, certain papers, some of the LA papers especially bad. Like they'll have like a racist cartoon of Gans or and then saying horrible stuff about his wife, and like it's really dark. It's different today among the mainstream media. Now that you can find every dipshit who will say any old horrible thing. There's bottom feeding trolls like throughout the internet. So you can find lowbrow stuff, but you're not going to turn on ESPN. The guys would be like, we don't want the Negro getting the opportunity to this and this and like, uphold the honor of the white race. You won't hear that, but you would hear that from some of the major papers back then. So that's why it's different. Now, in Ali's time, things had started to change, but again, they weren't changed. Hugely racist time, very unfair and unjust time, and he was right to speak up about it. He sacrificed a lot. But taking it back to Johnson, it was like a whole other level. And so, because it wasn't that many decades after the end of slavery in the U.S. I mean, we're talking like that. Like say, like in 65, and I'm researching like the early 1900s. Not a long time. It's not a long time.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that? What would that be today? Going back to the late 80s?
Well, yeah.
You imagine that? If that's what it is. We don't have Jim Crow laws now in the U.S. But if like the 1980s was like, oh, people were property in the 1980s, and here we are today.
Yeah, that's insane, right?
That's messed up. Johnson was born to former slaves.
Yeah, and we fortunately have footage more than some fighters of Johnson. You know, we have some footage of Johnson out there and him applying this trade more than we do have of other fighters and things of that nature. And you can see what the crowds look like and all that stuff, especially when he was fighting Tommy Burns or Jim Jeffries. And just think about what was being said and just being in that environment. You know what I'm saying? That's insane right there. It can't compare, you know, to right now to this day. You know what I'm saying?
Right. But for someone who grew up in a modern society, someone like Mayweather, who's sacrificed so much to stay in the kind of shape to let him be world class into well past when someone normally would, it probably feels like just a lifetime of adversity. So it's not to minimize his own struggle in the context of his time. So I don't want to be one of those guys that just starts hating on everyone just because guys have an ego. Lots of great people have egos, maybe bigger than their thing, but it's part of their drive. So yeah, because it becomes trendy to hate on certain fighters. I don't want to be a hater. You know, I'm just a researcher and just trying to learn the history. And so Mayweather deserves a lot of respect, but it's inaccurate to say that he even came close to what Ali faced. And Ali himself didn't come close to say what someone like Johnson faced. And Johnson had it easier than guys like maybe Georgie Dixon and certain guys, you know, like.
Man, yeah, right.
Because guys like George Dixon, Bob Armstrong, probably Joe Walcott, you know, where Battle Royale, where you get the big puffy gloves and you throw a bunch of colored boys in the ring and you blindfolded and just swing for the fences till the last guy's there. And they used to do it in the South on the plantations, but it stayed popular in more, you know, after emancipation. So like, you know, this is the sort of world that Johnson emerged into his greatness. It was really not that far removed from something just horrible, just unthinkable by today's standards. In spite of that, today is still very racist. I don't want to. Let's have no illusions here, folks.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. It's just part of a percentage of people who just have that fear translates into the will to like dominate. But yeah, Johnson overcame a lot. He was a great fighter, and just because he wouldn't fight the guy I'm writing a book about, I'm not going to diss him. Like, he did great things. And other guys in that time did great things. But say we mentioned Tommy Ryan. Tommy Ryan wouldn't fight Barbados Walcott.
Oh, yeah.
And he drew the color line of Walcott. But he was still a great fighter.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
It's ugly. The reason he stopped, whereas other people would like Tommy Burns didn't draw the line, but he wanted a certain guarantee, win, lose, or draw. And that's what he got for Johnson, but he got it for other fighters too. You know, depending on how good they were, you know, 10, 15,000. I'll come to your country and fight you. If you even fight a nobody, if someone coughs up the guarantee, almost fought Sam McVeigh.
George Byers was another who was a contemporary who was like the best at that time.
Byers was a fantastic fighter and also considered one of the very best coaches and cornermen in the business, even before he retired from fighting. And in fact, this was after his prominence, but like he had been coaching and training people, and they would always say in the press, anytime they mentioned that this fighter has George Byers, they're like, oh man, that's going to make a big difference. They always say it. So it was just known. And when the Armory AA opened in Boston in early 2008, Byers was the head trainer there. That's where Langford prepped for one of his fights with Joe Jeanette at the club. After he got back from a trip to the West, he was booked to fight Jeanette at one of their shows. And that's the same building. The Armory AA was in the same building on Tremont Street where Langford beat Joe Gans in December 1903.
Crazy right there. Crazy. Joe Gans. Just think about that, folks. Sam Langford, who we know and most people associate him with the heavyweight division. Let's think about him taking on Joe Gans. Just think about that. Think about any heavyweight taking on one of, if not the greatest, and in my opinion, the top lightweight champion of the time. And then they finished their career as the top heavyweight, though they didn't get the shot at the title. That being said, just think about that. You know what I'm saying? That's insane. You know, you can't fathom that today. I was mentioning earlier about Crawford going up to 168. Like, could he go up and beat a guy like Usyk? You know what I'm saying? And we don't even think about that being a fight that would happen, you know. But It's crazy, you know. Some of these guys back in the day, they would go up and they would fight the heavyweight.
Yo,
That
we
was
were talking about Big Sandy Ferguson with Joe Walcott, among other heavyweights. He fought Big Sandy Ferguson at the Criterion when they
that's
moved into that same building that the Armory was in later. But when the Criterion Club, I think it was October 1903, they did a run of weekly or every other week shows until Choyinski and Kid Carter got arrested I think it was January 04. I keep saying I think. This is my specialty. I don't have my notes open or anything. I don't have a good memory.
Yeah, same. That's the way I go about it as well. So
I'm afraid to say the wrong month and stuff. I've looked at this so much, but I don't want to sound like an idiot. I'm pretty baked.
But no, that's the beauty of it. Hey, you can just go off top, but you put in enough work right here, you can go off top. So yeah, you can have that caveat there. But yeah, you're right.
But Walcott was 5'1.5", and without a weight cut or training down, he was about 148 at his heaviest. Right?
Think about that, folks.
5'1.5". He was a little big man. It was a triangle of muscle. And he was a specialist. He could fight out of a crouch, but great body shots, really hard hitter. He came from a wrestling base. In the early 1890s, he was wrestling as well. He did wrestling and amateur boxing. So he was able to, I don't know what he was able to do, but he fought Big Sandy, man. Big Sandy's 6'3", probably 20 when they fought. Let's think, 19, maybe a little light, maybe 215. So before Langford ever started climbing the weights, Joe Walcott had already done it because most of the welterweights didn't want to fight him. Most of the white welterweights. And then he did fight Larry Temple, another colored fighter, very good fighter, and had a narrow title defense. But he did a lot of heavyweight work. And he even challenged Jim Jeffries. So around the time when Denver Ed Martin and Sam McVeigh were trying to set up fights with Jim Jeffries and Jack Johnson so was Joe Walcott.
Oh, yeah.
Jeffries ignored it, but the press reported that he was ignoring it purposefully. You know, it wasn't like he never heard about it because he was drawing the line in general, but he wouldn't even respond to that because.
Oh, yeah.
But Walcott was feared, so there was precedent for what Langford did. Fitz had already set the precedent to go all the way up to heavyweight, but other fighters tried. We've talked about it before, Josh, like Tommy Loughran, Maxie Rosenblum, Archie Moore, many great light heavyweights, Gene Tunney. Harry Greb would have liked to. Couldn't get the Dempsey fight, but he would have liked to. A lot of great light heavyweights or even middleweights that make their way all the way up. Ezard Charles, one of the all-time greats.
Yeah.
Another one. And Ez got it done. Archie Moore couldn't, but Archie Moore, to be past your prime, the best light heavyweight in the world, and then also win your way into top contention at heavyweight is some crazy stuff. To be an old guy giving up size and just getting it done. Archie Moore is one of the greatest of all time, easily.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. When I think about my 10 greatest fighters right there, or the 10 greatest fighters, he's definitely in the midst of that because just think about what he was able to accomplish. Not only that, but on top of that, you think about the knockouts and how many he was able to gain the most knockouts in addition to that. And he was a true road dog. So a lot of those fights were on the road, or I don't know the percentage, but I'm going to say probably 80-90% of his fights were probably on the road, just traveling. And it was nothing for Archie to go in there and get it done. And he can get it done at any point in the fight. So just a true warrior of the sport right there. Just you think about the rarest of the rare, he is certainly that.
Yeah, when I'm still working on my top 25. As it gets exponentially more difficult the further I go down the list. Once I get to number 18 and beyond, there's 15 or 16 fighters that could be number 18.
Oh, it's tough stuff.
Across all weights, because that's where I encounter the Alis and the Joe Lewises.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are because they're single weight fighters, or some because the overall resume isn't as big as some of the other all time greats. Because before I get to that, I got to include guys like Ted Kid Lewis, Peerless Jack Britton. Those guys, the 300 plus fight club must be, or the close to 300 fights. Maxie Rosenblum, almost 300 fights. But also a huge amount against rated fighters who were in the rankings when it was really hard to get ranked. And a lot of the guys, to get ranked for a year, you needed to have like a dozen fights, win 10 out of your 12 fights or something. Like they were fighting. So Rosenblum was putting in some seasons, but he wasn't alone. So it's actually quite funny. If you go do a crawl through BoxRec and if you go to the bout listing and it shows you the record, including newspaper decisions of the opponents of the time, some of these rivalries year to year, the guys, they fight in January of one year and then they fight again in March of the next year. And the guy's got like 15 more fights on his resume, the opponent.
Yeah.
So the evolution of these fighters, the rapidity of the evolution for the guys who could handle it. And Archie Moore was one of those guys. He was that guy. He could handle the schedule. He had the technique and the work ethic as far as his technique. And then he went on to be a great mentor and ambassador for the sport. He's another all-time great. He's always in my list, though, my top 10.
Oh, yeah. And that's why I think all wins and losses are not created equal, folks. And that's one of the prime examples right there. All wins and losses are not created equal. And, hey, we've hit that 2-hour mark there, random. Man, it's been crazy just talking about Jack Johnson and some of the amazing feats and things surrounding him. And, of course, this, we speak on him. I spoke on him a little bit before, about an hour before you joined there or somewhere around there. Random, we spoke about him more. You think about him, and then there are other fighters from these eras back then that we could go on multiple hours just speaking about some of the things that they were able to do in the sport. Very different sport at that particular time, and just how they operated back then. You would view it as insane here today there, Random, but man, I appreciate you coming on as we chatted about such, and we were able to discuss it, and I'm grateful to have you be able to come on board and share your insight, research that you've done, and all of that stuff. But before we head out here, Random, you can let the people know what you've got coming up, what you're working on right now.
Yeah, the book project is going well. I'm just still working on the first draft. I don't know if I'll get it the whole first draft by the end of the year, but I'm just plugging away, tighten up the references. Some parts of the body, like I'll have one of the newspaper accounts, but not the other newspaper that appears to have been there. So I'm just adding things in, steadily going. But the average over the first 100 pages has like 300 references. Because I'm using a lot. It's about 3 a page is the average across at least the first 100. I don't know if it's more or less after that point, but it's intentionally heavily cited. Lots of quotes. I don't rewrite the action, so they tell it. They tell the story, and I add context around it. So that's why it's heavily cited, because it's supposed to be ironclad. I'm not even taking a position. I'm just describing what happened, but using their words. And so. Yeah, just tighten it up. It's really exciting academically. I love it. And I want to release it next year because that's 100 years since his final retirement. So
that's crazy. 100 years, folks. You hear that? 100 years. It's insane to think about it. So we appreciate Random Acoustic Thoughts putting something out there that I think you're going to really enjoy. You've probably seen some things on Langford, but this right here is going to go in depth on that earlier portion of his career there, and there will be some things that you probably didn't know of that will be revealed in this biography.
I was able to dig up some stuff, including some peripheral information that doesn't appear to be out there for the people yet. So there's other stuff that I was able to learn that I haven't at least encountered at this point. But briefly, so Langford had lost to Joe Jeanette on Christmas Day, 1905. Got stopped after the fight. He said it's because the ref wasn't letting Jeanette use elbows.
Mm-hmm.
And then they wanted a rematch, but with a referee of national reputation. They did end up rematching in Chelsea in April of the next year, and he won on points, 15 rounds, giving up like 20 pounds or so to Jeanette. And that's how he got the Johnson fight. The same club asked Johnson, who was on the East Coast in the Northeast, and Langford, and they both just immediately said yes. It was the easiest fight. The first fight was as easy as the second fight was impossible. So I just wanted to add that when they fought in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Johnson Have no doubt about it. Johnson whipped his ass.
Oh,
Don't
yeah.
believe all the other stuff. Johnson beat him up, but the crowd was cheering for Langford, and Langford was willing to mix it up. So he was taking his ass kicking and still coming forward. And Johnson, when he plant and throw, Langford was happy to do it. This is a tiny person comparatively. Crazy fight. But that's how he got it, by beating the great Joe Jeanette, who was also early in his career.
That's insane. That's insane thinking about that, folks. And Langford was not full-fledged heavyweight at that time. So take that and digest on that and look forward to what is to come there. The Random Acoustic Thoughts, folks. Be sure to follow Random at Random Acoustic Thoughts here on YouTube. Easy
I gotta
enough.
do some content.
Oh yeah, hey, but you have some stuff out there that they can digest on.
Yeah,
Right
there's
now.
a ton of content. We should do some more fantasy fights, Josh.
Let's do it. Let's set something up. Maybe next week we'll come with some of that right there, fantasy fight or something of that nature, because I had gotten some from the final boss. So I'll get with you in that regard there, Random. And hey,
what's up,
to you folks. We are coming back to you there because hey, we love this boxing history stuff. So enjoy the rest of your night. And
hey, last thing, Josh.
Yeah.
You see my avatar? What does that say?
Joe Louis is 137 years old.
Yo, if there's anyone listening who hasn't seen that clip of Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, and their other buddy doing the barbershop talking heavyweight boxing, you got to go see that, because that's what that quote's from. That's the only shirt I think that I've ever ordered online. I had to have it. I saw it. I had to have it. I still have it. I love that shirt.
I'm gonna get you an 86 boxing shirt over there to you. All right.
Oh, that's what's up. That's what's up.
We'll represent there for sure.
Yo, do you have that? Do you have that Blackburn one in a hoodie? I might buy one of those.
I'll make something happen. There for
sure.
Let's
talk. Let's talk.
Yes, sir. Hey,
all
for
right.
the rest
Thanks,
of you,
86.
definitely enjoy the rest of your night. Hey, I see you there, buddy. Appreciate you dropping by, showing some love, and we will be back. So check with us next week. Pretty much same time. So we're gonna try to make it happen. As long as nothing is, I might have something. If not, but we'll get it. We'll get the day right, and you'll know about it. We'll get it there ahead of time, folks. So enjoy the rest of your night and weekend. So until then, peace and continue to digest on that boxing history for sure. And I got you there. Get us. Let's make it happen. Peace, folk. Peace. Enjoy the rest of your night. Peace.